Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. Hello and welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today I have a very special guest with a very extensive resume that I'm delighted that is here to talk about his latest book. He is I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as possible. It is a very long list, but he is a New York Times bestseller, 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner, anthology editor, comic book writer, executive producer, magazine feature writer, playwright, and then on top of all of that, he's also a writing teacher and lecturer. And then if that wasn't enough, this guy is also the editor of Weird Tales magazine and the president of the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers. He's a recipient of the Ink Pot Award, 3 Scribe Awards, and he was named today's top 10 horror writers. His books have been sold to more than 30 countries. He writes in several genres, including thriller, horror, science fiction, epic fantasy, and mystery. And I am thrilled to have him here today. So please say hello and welcome to the show, Jonathan Mayberry.
Hi, Rick. And boy, I'm exhausted from
You and me both, my friend. I practiced that all night. So.
I'm glad to be here. So thanks for having me on.
Well, today we're here to talk about this amazing book, which I don't know if you can see. I'm trying to avoid the light. It's called Necrotech. But before we get into that, I would love to know a little bit more about you, Jonathan. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and specifically, how did you kind of come to writing? What was your journey into becoming a writer?
Well, it's a long, strange trip. I've always wanted to be some kind of a storyteller. That was always my thing. And even when I was a little kid, before I could read and write, I was telling stories with toys, doing puppet shows for all the tolerant neighborhood parents. But when I was in high school right after Watergate. So I wanted to become an intrepid journalist who would crack the big case and tear down the corrupt, whatever. And I went to school on a journalism scholarship, went to Temple University, and did, in fact, write nonfiction, but weirdly, not newspaper stuff, even though I went to school for that. I wound up taking a class on magazine features, did that forever. Started selling magazine features in high school, did that well up into the early 2000s as a side gig. My main day job was variously bodyguard, bouncer, jiu-jitsu instructor, college teacher. But I didn't even consider fiction until I was well into my 40s. I had a 4-book contract with a small press publisher in Philly for nonfiction books, and I'd done 3 martial arts books. And then just for the heck of it, I wanted to do a book that I thought my grandmother would have liked. And she was, if you know the character Luna Lovegood from Harry Potter, the little girl who believes in everything, imagine her as an old lady. That was my grandmother, believed in everything. So I did a book on supernatural predators around the world and throughout history. Vampires, werewolves, the early stories people believed in, as opposed to the Hollywood versions, which are substantially different. And writing it, I got interested in trying to find novels that use the folkloric versions of these monsters, again, as opposed to the Hollywood versions, and had a hard time with it. So my wife said, just stop bitching about it and try write the damn thing. So I basically just figured I'd write one novel with folkloric monsters, get it out of my system, and go back to nonfiction. And I fell in love with the craft of fiction in the middle of that book, in the writing of it. And that was my first novel. I finished it. It took 3.5 years to write. First novels take as long as they take. But I wound up getting an agent fast, and my agent sold it fast. And it went on to win the Bram Stoker Award for Best First Novel. It was also up for Novel of the Year, but I lost that one to some up-and-coming kid named Stephen King. I think the kid's
that guy.
He's got some promise. I think he might have a career ahead of him, But so that novel came out in 2006, and I am 3 days away from starting a novel number 52.
Look at you.
I've
I mean,
been,
I thought I was a busy man, but God, you put me to shame, my friend.
well, it's
So,
funny. I think I learned a lot of the high speed research and writing from my journalism days.
right.
And I also like the fast lane. I'm not going to say I ever drove above the speed limit when I was younger. I like the fast lane. And I feel like in a way I'm catching up with all those years where I wasn't writing fiction, because I've always had ideas for novels and short stories, but never consider myself a fiction guy. So I just, no, that's a cool idea. And then that's the end of the idea. Now, I love fiction. It's my obsession. And I also, along the way, started writing comics, short stories, and other things. And I can't get enough of it.
It's inspirational. And I'm kind of curious though, you talked a little bit about sort of you speed research and do all that. I wanted to know a little bit about your process when it comes to writing. Are you someone that dives in with both feet? Are you more of a planner and a plotter? Do you do a little both? I mean, what's your process when you're getting into the story?
I call myself an organic plotter, in that I do come up with a plot outline ahead of time for my novels for the following reasons. Since most of my stuff has a thriller element and a mystery element, no matter what other genre it's falling in, I want to be able to lay the foundations of the mystery, like leaving clues, foreshadowing, building, metaphor and motif in there to kind of, draw the reader in a certain direction. But at the same time, I can't expect to have all my best ideas the day I write my plot. So I keep the outline bare bones. As the book is writing, it comes to life. Characters become real people. Plot lines go in directions you don't expect. And also, since I do research before I start writing and also while I'm writing, sometimes that research changes the direction of a story. For example, a lot of writers, we writers have a fairly big bank of knowledge, right? That's why it's really frustrating and annoying to sit next to us if we're watching Jeopardy. We know a lot of stuff. We yell out the answers. It annoys people. So the problem there is sometimes we think we know more than we do. And I was going to do one novel where the bad guys were creating a portable electromagnetic pulse weapon that would, cancel out electrical signals and fry circuitry. And the original plot idea was to have them go and do this at nuclear power plants and shut them, cause them to go into overload. And then I started doing research about nuclear power plants and found out that wouldn't work on any nuclear power plant in the United States because they use electromagnetics to hold the control rods up. If the power goes out, they drop and it shuts down the reactor. So sometimes what you anticipate your novel will be has to change because research tells you you're going in the wrong direction, and you have to be able to pivot. And if there's something from the original idea that can fold it into the new plot, that's great. If not, you have to scrap it and move on. Or a lot of different things can happen, and you've got to allow for that organic growth, or you're going to stifle the potential for the novel.
I love that. Well, that being said, let's talk about this book, shall we? Because I gotta say, it blew me away. So I'm gonna let you do sort of the proper overview of the book and everything, but it's kind of a book about it's a world of shape-shifting machines and ultra advanced technology and necromancy and all these different things. So give us a little bit of an overview about what the book itself is about.
All right. Well, the setup is kind of alluded to on the cover, and it's mentioned in enough reviews that this won't be spoilers. Set 150 years in the future, we're trying to prove that matter teleportation will work. There's a big space station out near Jupiter, and they have a device on there that's going to send the first test capsule just to the far side of Jupiter. And that's the plan, just to see if it will work. And something goes horribly wrong. And instead of the capsule being sent to the far side of Jupiter, the space station is sent to the far side of the Milky Way galaxy, 53,000 light years away. There's no chance of them ever getting home. Because even in advanced science fiction stuff like this, Einsteinian relativity is still a thing that we can't sneak around as easily. So they're stuck out there, and we find out that creatures like Cthulhu and other of the Lovecraftian cosmic monsters came to Earth, not to conquer us, but because they were afraid of what's out there. And now we're out there. And so that's the setup for this series. And, we encounter ghosts. I mean, the title of the book comes from a conjunction of necromancy and technology, NECROTEK. And one of the things we discover is that there's this ancient war that's been going on with these powerful beings called the Outer Gods, and they have an army of shape-shifting monsters, a fleet of them, and their ships can change shape. and we have to see if we can figure out how to do that ourselves so that we can fight them, since there's more of them than there are of us. So we need to kind of level up. And that's where the story goes. And how do we fight an apparently unstoppable enemy with the resources available to us? So there's a lot of deals with a lot of human ingenuity, self-sacrifice, courage, and also ghost-driven giant mechs. So, I get my Pacific Rim vibe on there.
I love it. I loved it. I loved it. I love it. So what inspired you to put these elements together, with ghosts and gods and cosmic horror and all of that technology and all of this sort of into this particular story? What was the big inspiration behind it?
It's kind of a culmination of my interests since I was a kid. When I was, 13, I think, I got to meet and be mentored by Sprague de Camp, who was also the writer who brought Conan back from obscurity back in the 50s and 60s. And he lived in Philadelphia, lived outside of Philadelphia, and he was a huge Lovecraft fan. And at one of his house events for writers, a little statue of Cthulhu fell off a shelf and hit me in the top of the head.
Divine inspiration.
Yeah, I think so. And then he explained who Cthulhu was and what Lovecraft was, and gave me a bunch of old copies of Weird Tales magazine to take home, actual original Weird Tales magazine to take home and read some of the Lovecraft stories. And I started falling in love with them, and then I started realizing that the Lovecraftian elements appeared in the Conan stories. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. It turns out Camp pointed out to me that Howard was one of many proteges of H.P. Lovecraft. And, they all had correspondence going on. And Lovecraft encouraged any of the other writers who wrote for Weird Tales to take any elements of his cosmic pantheon of weird creatures, to take them and use them free of charge. It was the first that I know of shared world in popular fiction. And so I read a lot of Weird Tales as a kid, looked for and became a huge fan of Lovecraft. Not so much the guy, but the setups. The cosmic monsters, the levels of reality, the pan-dimensional stuff with Earth and Dreamland and so on. It was so fascinating, and so many writers since then have built on that. So there's a big body of work, and some of those writers, like the late Brian Lumley, was a friend of mine, and he had written extensively in it, and others had. And then I became editor of Weird Tales magazine, and I felt like my whole career kind of pointing me in the direction of taking my love of science fiction, of horror, and adventure, and Lovecraft, and putting them all into one book. And NECROTEK is that book, and I had more fun writing that book than is legally allowed. And I just finished the second one too.
What's that?
I just finished the second one 12 days ago, in fact.
Oh, I'm excited. Yay.
And the fun thing about when the second one starts, this is not a spoiler, the second one will start on Earth 2 years before the events. And it has deliberate nods to At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym by Edgar Allan Poe, and I'll explain the connection between the two of them in just a sec, and also Who Goes There by John W. Campbell, which is the basis for The Thing. So I kind of put nods to all of those very deliberately in the book for fans of pop culture. They'll catch those references.
I love.
The Poe thing, though, just real briefly. Most people don't realize that Edgar Allan Poe was the inspiration for At the Mountains of Madness by Lovecraft. He had written a book called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, in the 19th century, and it had a scene, set in Antarctica, and they hear these weird birds, they think they're weird birds crying, the strange sound, tekali, 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 and it was haunting. He wrote that. Jules Verne was pissed off that Poe had not given the book a definitive ending. He wrote a fan fiction book. Jules Verne wrote a fan fiction book called The Antarctic Mystery. And then those two books were among the favorites of a young H.P. Lovecraft. And he wanted to take that. He essentially, At the Mountains of Madness was his own version of fan fiction, saying that there was more to the story. They weren't giant birds or strange birds. They were these shuggoths, these shapeshifters. So it actually started with Poe and, made its way to Lovecraft. And now it's all of us who write Lovecraftian stuff for fun and to entertain our readers.
I'm absolutely fascinated and blown away by this. We could talk. I would love to talk to you all day long. I swear. I do want to talk about. I want to talk about the characters a little bit, right? So I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to not be spoilery in a way, but I think it's fine. So Lost was probably one of my favorite characters in the story. Soren, obviously. Bianca is a freaking badass, from the word go. And I love how she feels all her emotions, but then she could just turn, not so much on a dime. She processes it, but she's right back to she's basically a warrior at heart, right? So
Oh, yeah.
What's that?
She's very much so a warrior at heart.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the character, like talk about the characters in the story and sort of how you sort of design them, and especially Lost. Lost is so. I'm in love with Lost. So
well, I love the character, but it all started with Lars Soren. He was the character that I built the novel around, because Lars, he actually his personality touches on two different areas of my younger life. When I was in school, when I was in high school, aside from wanting to be the intrepid journalist, I also wanted to be, I had considered going into the seminary to become that radical minister that was always arrested at anti-nuke rallies and Salvadoran refugees in his basement, that guy, very political. So aside from my scholarship to Temple University, I also had a scholarship lined up to a seminary. I actually had to decide between the two, and I realized that religion probably wasn't my future. I mean, I have respect for it, but I'm not really religious. I was more spiritual than religious, so. But when I started conceiving Craftian science fiction story, I thought, who better as an entry character than someone who is trying to explain to other faith leaders. He's a theologian and a philosopher. He's not a cleric himself. Trying to explain to other faith leaders how they can keep their religions relevant in a future where Earth is no longer the center of the universe. So if and this is not proselytizing about God, anti or pro or anti, but within the story, if God exists, if a God exists, that God would have to be the God of the universe. Or are there gods of individual star systems? Are there gods of individual galaxies? And that crosses over to Lovecraft a bit, because his elder gods, his great old ones, are actually not gods. They're just being so powerful that they appear godlike. And so Soren is trying to speculate on how to explain to people that the universe is bigger than we think, and religion has to grow with it, or fails to be of relevant value. And so we started with that. And also, I just like him as a person. His orderly way of thinking is based on my way of thinking. I also have a mind. People talk about the mind palace, which is an old Greek concept. I have a mind library, and I can find things that I want in my library if I know where to go look. It's a memory technique, mnemonic thing. And so he's fun. He's the gentle version of me. I'm also a 60-year veteran of martial arts. I've been doing that for 60 years, and former bodyguard and so on. And so I gave those qualities to Bianca Petrescu. I was a very emotional pop culture nerd guy, but on the job as a bodyguard, I'm a different person. And that's kind of how that works with people who do those types of trades. The balance is allowing a sense of play so that they can then be emotionally balanced enough so that when they're in violent situations, they're not driven by the violence. They're protecting those people who can't protect themselves. That's the warrior as opposed to just a soldier. The warrior understands the need for occasional conflict, but does it to protect those who can't protect themselves. So those two characters, were my entry characters. But Lost, the first scene I wrote, actually the first two scenes I wrote, first one was Lost. It was Soren finding the Shrine of the Penitent, which is one of my favorite scenes. It actually opens the book and is echoed later on. But the second scene I wrote, out of continuity, the rest of the book, was the scene where Soren meets Lost in the hallway, which is probably one of my favorite scenes I've ever written, because the character of Lost changed within 3 sentences of writing that scene.
Wow.
He was a much more orderly and recognizable humanoid character And then I realized I'm missing an opportunity to go deeper and to explore the phenomenon of life and death and so on, and also loneliness and despair. And Lost was a better vehicle for that if he was not just an alien that the characters met. So and the character, as I built the character out, he became as important to me as Bianca and Soren. So they are the three characters that are central to the book.
Well, it's funny you say that. One of my questions is, talking about, without being too spoilery, talking about a pivotal moment or a scene from the book that readers should look forward to. And I was going to share mine, and you've sort of touched on that in a little way for me. It was so poignant for me that I actually wrote it down. It's part 10, chapter 9. I think that's how the book is sort of broken up. But it's when Lost is having a heart-to-heart with Soren about how the Outer Gods arrived and how the arrival of Asphodel Station revealed their location. But more importantly, it just had all of these elements of the universe and of existence and duty and sacrifice and all of these amazing things that I found it to be very, very profound. And I just wanted to mention that to you, because usually it's like, what's the scariest moment in the book, right? Or it's, this or that. But for me, I think I've read that chapter 10 times just because it covers so much, and it was very profound for me. So
I'm so glad it had that impact. I remember writing it too. I was weirdly in like the least metaphysical place ever. I was in a Panera's in
I don't know, maybe it is.
Having squash soup and iced tea, and then that scene started building in my head, and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't plan to write that scene right now, and then I sat and I wrote that entire scene, right there at the Panera. And that's one of those times you walk out of there feeling like, I almost don't want to write any more today. I want to kind of end on that note. And I did in that particular case. I let that scene just be my day's writing. So
yeah, it was beautiful. I thought it was really, really great. So.
Thanks.
But maybe you've already answered the question, but is there a moment for you in the book that you thought was pivotal? And maybe it's the moment in the hallway with Lost, but is there another? Maybe?
That's one of a few different scenes that I really that locked me into the story when writing it, and again when listening to the audio, which Ray Porter does an amazing job with the audio. But it's the scene with Soren and Lost in the hallway, the scene where we see the Necrotech for the first time. And I'm not going to go too much into that, especially the scene where we encounter Bianca in that part of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, one of the scenes that touched me really deeply when writing it is when they were taking the body of one of their friends off of the ship and creating kind of an honor guard moment. And I'd written that not that long after my brother, who had served in Vietnam, had committed suicide. So which was very recent. It was only a couple of years ago. And the thought of what a fallen warrior is to the people involved, it's both respect for their dead. It's also them glimpsing their own future. They, if someone they trained with, who's been with them on a bunch of missions, can die, so can they. And it has that. And also just the respect for a life spent, that ended doing the right thing by fighting impossible odds for people. We talk a lot about servicemen, we thank them for their service, but we don't necessarily always know what that service means, what that entails.
Right.
And, the same with firefighters and EMTs and a bunch of other people who are on different versions of the front line. The heroism, the courage. Courage does not mean fearlessness, because fearlessness is a psychological aberration. Fear is there. Courage, I forget who said that. There's a quote I love so much, is that a brave man is no braver than anyone else. He's just braver 5 minutes longer. That says it so well. I forget who said it. I've used the epigram before, but those scenes, and there was one other that the Shrine of the Penitent scene, which, little side note, every day before I write, I read poetry aloud. Doesn't matter whose poetry, what kind of poetry. And I've been reading aloud. Okay, go to the beach every morning and I read my poetry, but I was reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland and that morning, and then I sat down and wrote the Shrine of the Penitent over breakfast, and it carried with it some of the philosophic bleakness that Eliot put into The Wasteland. And I wanted to try to capture that. Of course, I'm no T.S. Eliot, but I accomplished what I tried to set out to do for a scene that is science fiction, philosophy, awe, and suspense in one scene, and without trying to be too heavy-handed in either direction.
I mean, I feel like well done, because it certainly came off that way, at least to me. And I will say that in your writing, it was so beautiful in so many ways, not to sound too fanboyish, sorry, but it really was quite beautiful. And that all of the respect, especially when speaking about duty and sacrifice and the frontline people and first responders and all of that beauty and that respect really came across and came off the page to me. And I felt it in having family members who are in the service. I certainly felt that, and I felt the honor in that. So I thought that was great and really well done.
Thanks. I'm the first guy in my family in like hundreds of years that did not serve, and partly because I graduated from high school right after Vietnam, and none of my buddies and I were leaping to enlist at the time. But I have some significant members of my family who did well. My great grandfather. This is such a weird story. My great grandfather, who was a sergeant in the army, he captured my wife's great grandfather at the Battle of Gettysburg. And won the Congressional Medal of Honor, and I'm named after him. He's John B. Mayberry. I'm John E. Mayberry. So I'm named after him, and I didn't even know this until his backstory until well into my 40s. My wife looked it up on a Civil War website because she was looking up her own grandfather, and there he was. So I've got some heroes in my family. I'm not one of them, but I respect what they've done. And also, I've had my life saved by a first responder. When I was doing bodyguard work, I got chopped in the shoulder with a meat cleaver and was bleeding out. A first responder saved my life.
Wow.
So I have a lot of respect for first responders. My brother-in-law was a firefighter. I mean, all around me are people who have been serving their community in one way or another. And most of them do not, want to be looked at as a hero. That they're not doing it for praise. And that humility in service is a great concept, and it's there more often than people give credit for it. They usually celebrate only the loudmouths or the bad guys, but it's the quiet ones. They're legion. There's a lot of them out there, and we should respect them.
I wanted to also, I feel like I'm jumping back a little bit, so sorry it's a little out of order, but I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the outer gods and the eldritch beings, and you've certainly referred back to craft and all of that, but are there any specific other influences or mythologies that you drew from in order to create these entities? And other than just the love for Lovecraft, I guess is
a lot of it is actually just looking at world culture and world religion going back through time. I mean, we have cultures that devoutly believe for hundreds or even thousands of years they're gods, and nothing of their culture remains but relics, which means their gods are just chapters in a history book. And that's a kind of an odd thing to me. That's kind of more of the basis for the cosmology that I approach in NECROTEK, even than Lovecraft, because what if all of these gods, hypothetically, for the sake of fiction, what if all these gods had existed, but for some reason they perished? What if they were space travelers whose level of technology made them appear indistinguishable from gods? And I think that might have been H.G. Wells or Arthur Clarke who said any sufficiently advanced culture is indistinguishable from magic. One of those two guys said that. And so you have all these thousands and thousands of years of beliefs in different gods and different pantheons. It is so arrogant to look back and say all of those religions are wrong, because it's not the one that people believe today. And now we have competing religions that are very strong, that have hundreds of millions of adherents. And how can anyone say mine is the only one that's right? That's insane. It's nuts. So I like the idea of these layer upon layer upon layer of beings of either advanced technology or advanced evolution that have made them indistinguishable from humans who appear godlike. And you see it all throughout history, and a lot of speculation. A lot of the UFO community and so on are speculating, the Anunnaki and all these Nephilim and all these different characters. What if all of them are real? So my premise starting Necrotech is, what if they're all real? And as the series goes on, I'm hoping to write a bunch of these. I want to explore what I call local gods. Like the Jehovah would be the local god of Earth. He's the god of our sun. And as I explore in this, one of the philosophies or one of the theories Soren comes up with is that each sun is a god or a being godlike, and that will allow me a lot of stories to tell.
Yes, it will. I love that. I love that so much. Oh, let's not to get too philosophical here, but what is the message you're hoping that readers will sort of take away from this book? Because I feel like it's probably going to be different for everybody, right?
Yeah, there's a theme that appears in a number of my books, and that is that darkness, no matter how big and strong, or threat, no matter how big and strong, doesn't have a guarantee win. That even if it appears absolutely insurmountable, we have proven as a species that we can rise to challenges when we need to. And I love that about the human spirit. And some of this drills down to my own childhood. My father was a bad man. He abused my sisters and I. It was a terrible environment to grow up in. And it's the reason I got involved in martial arts. Had I not gotten involved in martial arts, I would never have been able to confront him when I was 14 and forcibly stop the cycle of violence in my house. But I was able to do that because I studied martial arts. Well, so knowledge can give you power. We've heard that expression before. Knowledge is power. Well, sometimes knowledge teaches you how to level up, to confront things that you're currently not able to deal with. So you have to acquire knowledge, skill, experience, something, and level up. And, for me as a kid, not only was it studying martial arts, but I also wanted to educate myself past what I was learning in school. I was in a very poor inner city area. Education was not highly prized. I read and read and read and read and read and read myself out of that neighborhood. I educated myself beyond what I learned in school to get out of that environment. So that's the sensibility I bring to a lot of my stories, that no matter how big something is, no matter how desperate or hopeless something appears to be, most people are untested, which means they don't know what they're capable of. And people are more resilient than they give themselves credit for, which means if they are inspired, either self-inspired or outwardly inspired, to try harder, do better, think deeper, whatever, they probably can. So that is, the characters in Necrotech should lose right away, but they don't. And they don't do it because some, Deus Ex Machina thing steps up. They do it because they see something and they use it either as an advantage or they adapt to be able to confront it. They take all available resources and build on it. So when people ask me why I write about monsters, I tell them I don't. I write about people who fight monsters.
I love that. Yes.
Now, if just as an example, look at the book Dracula. Any one of those characters, the heroes in that story, if they had gone up against Dracula, would be killed. If they did not share their resources, they would all die, and London would have fallen to Dracula. If they did not find value in teamwork, they would all have died. So the only way they were able to beat Dracula is together, pooling their knowledge, and then leveling up to be able to become a unified force to fight this apparently indestructible monster. Well, that's the basis for most good horror stories, where there's a ray of light somewhere at the end of the tunnel. Doesn't necessarily mean it's an easy win, but and there's usually a cost along the way. That happens.
I love the point of view on it. I think it's fantastic. So you've already told us a little bit about what's on the horizon for you. So it sounds like, in case you haven't heard it, you heard it here first. There's a sequel coming to Necrotech and hopefully a series. Did I hear that? So
yeah, first off, for those who don't know, Weird Tales magazine had partnered with Blackstone Publishing to create a new novel imprint called Weird Tales Presents. Necrotech is the first book in that series, but there are plenty more coming. The next one coming up is actually another cosmic horror science fiction, not related to mine, called Nether Station by Kevin J. Anderson. Then there's going to be Supernatural Crime Scene Unit by Keith DeCandido, and other stuff. But
Oh, that one sounds
I
fun.
sold 3 books to this imprint. The third one, I'm kind of waiting. Since I just turned in the second one. For any writers listening to this, generally you don't write the sequel until you've got notes on the first book, because that may change what you write in the sequel. So I'm not going to even start fully plotting out the third book. I have a rough idea. Fully plotting it out until I get the notes back on the second book that I just turned in. And I should get those in about a month. And once we go through the editing process, that'll be able to refine my idea of where to go next. And then with each book, I'll be resolving one threat, but then setting up the next stage of the war. And I want to keep writing NECROTEK books as long as people keep buying them, because I am having way too much fun doing this.
Well, I love the book. I hope you come back for the second, the third, and all the books that you write, because it is like, I'm already hooked. I'm in. So again, the book is called Necrotech. I'm going to I'll get a proper piece of art in there somewhere, but I'm trying to avoid the light. But there's the
yeah, it's a very shiny cover. Yeah. And by the way,
beautiful.
Great cover art by Jeff Wong.
I love that cover art. That was the first thing I noticed before I even read the summary for it. I was like, yes, I'm in. So let's do it.
Yeah, we went back and forth on that cover, and Jeff is amazing. He really brought the creepiness. It sells science fiction and horror right there. You know, yep. He did a great job.
For sure. I was like, it was, I love great cover art, and I think he did a great job with it. So the book is everywhere now. And you mentioned there's an audiobook, which I actually did buy, that's done by Ray Porter. And yep. I got to say, when I listened to the audiobook, I put in my AirPods and I was like, I'm going to go for a walk. And that's when I started the book. And I ended up, 5 miles, which was like, before I even realized, I was like, holy.
So, your fitness plan.
Exactly. So definitely recommend the audiobook too. Ray Porter's amazing. He does a great job with all the characterization. So it's a fun read. And as we always like to say here at Quills and Chills, please support your local bookstores whenever possible. So Jonathan, how can our audience find you on social media?
Okay, so the trick is just spelling my last name right. Everybody wants to put a Y in the middle of my last name. It's Maberry. It's right below on the screen here. And I'm JonathanMaberry.com is my website. At Jonathan Mayberry is Threads, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you just search Jonathan Mayberry on Facebook, it'll have me in a Hawaiian shirt. Big surprise. I'm always in a Hawaiian shirt. And
I do a lot of Q&As on Facebook too, or AMAs more, not Q&A.
Every Thursday from 4 to 5 Pacific time, I do an Ask Me Anything on Facebook, and it's just a lot of fun. We just did one yesterday. We had a lot of fun, and I give away prizes for the 2 best questions each week. I give away prizes, and that's always a lot of fun too. So
well, I'm definitely going to join you for one of those. That'll be fun. So I'll definitely sort of tune in for that. So.
And by the way, the first person to have read Necrotech who was not part of the publishing world was the actor Wayne Brady.
Really?
Yeah, I know him, and he asked me he heard about it, and he asked me for a PDF. I sent it to him. He read it on the plane as he was flying to New York to launch into the revival of The Wiz. He was playing The Wiz, and he got off the plane and just sent me a video, just so excited about it. So that kind of made me feel great.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. So love Wayne Brady too. It's fantastic.
He's great.
Well, Jonathan, again, I know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I definitely want you to come back. I definitely want to talk more about Necrotech, and hell, we'll find a reason to get together and talk. So.
Yeah, I'm not going to be stopping writing. So I'm doing 4 books a year right now. So there's to talk about.
Perfect.
And it's fun to be with somebody who's a fellow pop culture nerd. So.
Well, that's me. Trust me. I've got 20 years of it. So I'll give you my backstory one day in the very first gig I had, which was sci-fi and horror. So
nice.
Good times. All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your time today. And for everybody, we'll see you next time on Quills and Chills.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me on another episode of Quills and Chills. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the mysterious and the haunted. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform and leaving us a rating or review, because your feedback helps keep those chills running down both our spines. And feel free to share the show with your favorite fellow horror enthusiasts. Also, if you guys have any spooky stories, strange encounters, or paranormal experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Reach out to me on social media or email me at quillsandchillspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Your story might end up on a very special episode. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time on Quills and Chills. Bye, y'all.